Good morning, boys and girls. Mr. Schwally here. Sorry I couldn't get Benjamin Franklin today on our lesson about the Revolutionary War. He apparently is busy with inventions. But he did leave his hat, so I'm going to borrow his hat for today's lesson. Anyway, boys and girls, as I do the reading for today's lesson, I'd like everyone to make sure you have this page either on your Google Classroom or in front of you so you can write down the answers as we go. All right, we're kind of fast forwarding through the Revolutionary War. You're going to be learning a lot more about it in later years, but we're going to give you some information so that you're going to be able to write a little bit about it, or at least one part of the war, one aspect of it. So if you have your books, I'd like you to open up to page 106. And I'm going to be doing a little read aloud there, but you're also going to have a chance to answer these questions. So I will pause every once in a while to give you a chance to respond to this. Okay? All right. Unrest in the colonies. All right. This right here is a primary source piece of information that I'll read. In 1754, the Duke of Newcastle, an English leader, complained, the French claim almost all of North America except a line to the sea, to which they would confine all our colonies, and from whence they may drive us whenever they please. To this he added, this is what we must not. We will not suffer. One thing both the British and the French seemed to forget, of course, was that the land both claimed belonged to the Native Americans. So before the Revolutionary War, there was a war called the French and Indian War. And it involved the French, the British, and the Native Americans, and they were fighting about land. All right, that's one of your questions. What started the French and Indian War? Okay. France and Britain had been fighting in Europe for centuries. By the middle of the 1700s, France and Britain were once again headed for conflict, this time in North America. Both countries claimed land west of the Appalachian Mountains. Both believed they had a right to be in that region. The French built forts to protect their territory. The British did the same. The stage was set for war. It came in 1754. The war is known as the French and Indian War. All right, the French and Indian War. The British colonies were growing rapidly. The French colonies had far fewer settlers. Over time, British colonists began moving west. So, boys and girls, if you look at this map real quickly, that yellow, these are the British colonies that we were talking about a couple weeks ago, okay? This territory here with the stripes was the French territory. Now, there were not a lot of French people living in this area. They were mostly like trappers, getting fur and things like that. But the colonies were established and they were moving further and further west for land. But in this whole process, the British wanted land. The Native Americans had been there for years. They wanted land. And of course, the French wanted land. So it set the stage for a fight known as the French and Indian War. So it was a war over land. Okay, think about question number one. French built forts, fearing that the British would take control. The British sent George Washington, a young officer from Virginia, into the area. In 1754, Washington's forces clashed with French soldiers. This marked the beginning of the French and Indian War. So, George Washington, who you will read about later and probably have heard of, he was a commander on the British side. He was a leader on the British side in this war in 1754, and it gave him an important experience. Think about that question there. Both European powers wanted to support the Native Americans. Many Native American groups fought as allies of the French. An ally is a friend with whom one is united for a common purpose. Well, the British end up winning this war. British victory. At first, New Jersey had little interest in the war because its lands were not in danger. After time, the colony provided soldiers for the British Army. Remember, we were only a colony then, under the British. Many of the soldiers lived and trained at buildings called barracks in Trenton. Those barracks are still there. If you go there, you can see this spot. The last major battle of the war took place in 1759 at Quebec, a city in Canada. The British victory there put an end to France's power in North America. A peace treaty was signed in 1763. As the map on this page shows, France gave Canada and lands east of the Mississippi River to Britain. The British set aside lands between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi for Native Americans. So Native Americans had these, and then British took the territory in Canada. Okay, so that was the French and Indian War. So think about what started it, and then who was an important leader in that war. Remember, first president of the United States. All right, now we're going to be moving on. So please work on answer that question, and then we're going to start with the conflict on the colonies. All right, hopefully you answered number 1 and 1B. And now we're going to be going on to number 2 and 3. Number 2, the question is, why did Britain want the colonies to pay more taxes? And 3 is, what did the colonists mean when they cried no taxation without representation? Well, let's read a little bit about it, okay? We're going to skip some of this stuff because it's less important, but we're going to get to the main stuff, okay? Great Britain spent much money fighting the French and Indian War. Britain wanted the colonists to help pay for the costs of the war. Wars cost a lot of money, all right? And they were in a big war here with the French and the Native Americans. And as a result, they had to pay for that war. It cost a lot of money for all the soldiers and everything. And they decided they were going to go to the British colonists to get that money. And as you can imagine, they were not happy about it. Let's read about it. Taxes and protests. To raise money, the British decided to make the colonists pay a tax. A tax is money people pay to the government. The Stamp Act of 1765 placed a tax on items like newspapers. A stamp on an item showed that the tax had been paid. So that's why they called it the Stamp Act. So if you had to buy certain items, you had to pay an extra tax for it. They put a stamp on it. Like if you were buying a newspaper, it said you paid the stamp. You paid for the tax. The Stamp Act angered many colonists. They were used to paying taxes in their colonial assemblies. However, this tax was different. Colonists could vote for representatives to their assemblies. They were not allowed any representatives to the British government in faraway London. Soon the cry, no taxation without representation, became an important slogan for the colonies. Okay, so remember, they did not want to pay these taxes. It was for a war they really didn't care that much about, and they had to pay lots of taxes, and it cost things a lot more. And what made it worse is the colonists were not allowed to vote for the king and the queen and those people who made these decisions. They couldn't make the decisions about the taxes. So they got really, really angry. And so the cry became no taxation without representation. Meaning, if I'm not going to pay taxes unless I can vote for the leaders who are deciding how we're going to spend that money. And they got very angry. The British ended the tax in 1766 because of colonial protests. However, new taxes, it didn't stop the taxes, just stopped that one tax. However, new taxes and the presence of soldiers in the colonies sparked new rounds of protests. So they're getting angry and angrier because they're sending the soldiers, also known as redcoats, to the American colonies. And they didn't like having these soldiers hanging around. And they could just come in your house and eat your food and things like that. Then they put this tax on tea. Okay? They put a tax on tea. By the 1760s, the British government needed to raise money. So the tea tax became another one where they fought a lot, and you've probably heard about the British Tea Party or the Tea Party. And what happened in the Tea Party is the Americans dressed up as Indians, and they went on a British ship that was selling tea, and they dumped all the tea overboard because they were angry about the taxes. And they were screaming, no taxation without representation, okay? And they got angrier and angrier, and the British kept on sending more redcoats. That lobsters is what they were nicknamed. Here, let me try to show you a picture if I can find one. But they were nicknamed redcoats because they would wear these red uniforms. Okay, so right now, boys and girls, I'd like you to answer that question number 2 and 3. Why did Britain want the colonies to pay more taxes? What were they paying for? Why did they need money? What was the thing they were doing that needed more money? And the third question is, what did the colonists mean when they cried, no taxation without representation? All right, what did that mean? Think about what taxes are and what representation is. Remember, when you were represented, it means that you voted for someone, okay? Voted for someone to be your leader. All right, I'm going to pause now and give you a chance to answer those questions completely. Okay, boys and girls, as you can imagine, the colonists were getting angrier and angrier about the presence of the redcoats and about paying those taxes. So they just started to form meetings and decide what were they going to do about this. They were getting so angry, they were like, what are we going to do about this? So people were divided about the problems with Great Britain. All right, some people wanted war with them. The royal governor, William Franklin, was a firm supporter of Great Britain. He feared that matters could get out of control. He refused to call the Colonial Assembly to meet. On July 21st, 1774, concerned colonists called their own meeting in New Brunswick, and they declared that the taxes were unfair. They voted to send 5 men representing New Jersey to the Continental Congress to be held in Philadelphia. All right. When they were there in this big meeting that had representatives, people from each colony who were angry about this, the delegates voted to stop all trade with Great Britain unless their demands were met. They also called on the colonies to prepare to defend themselves by forming militias. A militia was a group of citizens trained to fight and help in emergencies. So they were starting to get ready. They were getting angrier and they were getting prepared to fight if that was needed. But they're giving Britain a chance. They're saying, hey guys, we don't want to pay these taxes. We're giving you a chance. All right. So that was their chance. But eventually, and we're going to talk about this the next time, the British did not meet their demands. So those militias would end up needing to be used. So tomorrow we're going to talk about that letter we wrote to the British king called the Declaration of Independence. And that set the stage for the rest of the Revolutionary War. And we will spend a couple more class periods on that. All right. Answer those questions today. And it's a very interesting topic. So I hope you enjoy it. All right. Take care, boys and girls.